Amy.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Sure.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself? Like, how long have you been working here, and what are some of your hobbies, that kind of thing?
Sure. So I've been working technically with the Visitor Center since 2020. I moved back to my childhood home in 2019. I've been living in Chicago for many years, where I worked at a couple of museums there, the Dree House Museum and the Glesner House Museum, which had connections actually to the East Coast. And I was giving tours there, both in the homes as well as walking tours and so on. And a million years ago, when I was living in the area, I was a guide at the Old Manse. So upon my return to the area, I knew I wanted to continue with history. And I signed up for a History of Concord course, not knowing that that was the course that you need to get your license and all to be a guide. But when I interviewed for this position, they said, oh, well, you need to take this course. And I said, well, I'm already signed up. And so the rest, they say, is history. Yeah, so 2020 officially.
That must have been an interesting year to start out. Tell me a little bit about that.
When we started the class, it was before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were in a classroom over at the Concord Museum, and then the pandemic hit, and we had to do everything online via Zoom, even our final presentation. So it really changed things up a bit, but we got through that. And you know, the Visitor Center has grown so much since I first started. We only have like 2 tours, like our regular history tour that we offer at 1 o'clock and a Little Women tour. Mm-hmm. And I've been really fortunate to be able to work on content, research, etc., and lead so many of our tours that we offer now. So it's just been a wonderful experience to be able to really jump in and change the narrative, really dive into making sure our narratives are inclusive and accurate, and really give a voice to all of the history. So it's really exciting to be part of that.
Yeah. Speaking of all those different kinds of tours, is there a particular one that's your favorite?
Wow, that's tough. Every time I work on a new tour, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite. But I have to say probably right now the Indigenous tour. There had been one that was actually very good, written by a colleague, Mary Wren Vanderbilt, and I expanded on that. I had a real interest in the history and wanted to know more. I was able to work with an historian, Dan Budillion, who's written a book on the native culture that was up in the Neshoba, in the Praying Indian village. So just expanding on that history and really making sure that, again, like we're really including as much as we could about not only the history locally, but how it impacted everywhere else. And so it's been well received. People are really liking it. So I just continue to kind of build on that.
In a similar vein, on a lot of the tours, and at least the daily historical tour, you guys discuss Concord literary history.
Yes.
Specifically during the 19th century.
Right.
This is more of a fun question of like, out of Alcott, Emerson, Thoreau, and Hawthorne, who's your favorite?
Oh, wow. Well, probably I have leanings toward the Alcotts. Mm-hmm. But more actually because of the activism that's associated with it. So they all had that bent to a degree, but Louisa I find really fascinating, Louisa May Alcott. And so I think, you know, even if you're not a Little Women fan per se, kind of knowing the history about her life and what Little Women did for her family, which basically took their debt away. Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting to learn about what motivated people to do what they did and their circumstances. There's a Women of Concord tour, for example, that explores that very topic. Mm-hmm. And I find that really fascinating. But if I had to pick, I guess Louisa May Alcott.
This is kind of going along with what you've talked about. So, like most historical towns, Concord does have some pretty tough history.
Yeah.
What approach do you take to kind of describing the more difficult or shameful parts about Concord's past?
That's a great question. You know, certainly starting with the truth. Mm-hmm. I think that really is the goal, is to make people aware. You know, many of us, even that grew up here and were in the area, there was a very narrow narrative that was given. Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to, you know, let people know. I always tell people the beginning, like for example, the Indigenous tour, I say this is hard history to reconcile but it's important that we know it and honor it, to honor the people of the past, the present, and the future. And that's the way we're going to honor that, is by being honest. And that really helps kind of set the tone, as opposed to just, just saying it, because it does need a kind of an explanation. I mean, just for an example, there's this sort of myth that's been prevailing for many years about how the land was acquired. And that's a big part of Concord's history, and we have signage that says how it was done and all that, and kind of dispelling those myths and saying, listen, this is not exactly how this happened, and kind of walking people through the realities of that. And I think if you explain it and you're giving them kind of an understanding that it's not this easy history that we've all kind of been given, I think people really appreciate that, and they really understand that, oh, I need to look at this differently. And that's my job as a tour guide, as an interpreter, to make sure that I'm telling the history accurately and I'm presenting it in a way that people can appreciate, oh, it really wasn't like that, it was like this, and they get that.
Yeah, I really like that word, interpreter. I feel like that's a really good description for what you guys do. And on a lighter note, what is a favorite fun fact that you like to tell on tours?
I love talking about the pencils that Thoreau, his family, they had a pencil company coming from Acton. There's a great site in Acton that's not only has native stone sites, rock formations, but they've also discovered pencil factories, and Thoreau's pencil factory as well.
Wow.
So I kind of like to talk about pencil making here in Concord, because I think that's really kind of cool. There was also Monroe pencils from the founder's father, who was a cabinet maker and pencil maker. So I don't know. I love connections. I think that's one example. There's so many great things in Concord and connected histories, and oh, that's kind of cool. But that's one, for example. Yeah.
That's so cool. I've never actually heard that.
Yeah.
That's a new one for me. So the history of Concord is only part of what makes this town so special. So as somebody who lives in the area, what is something that you would consider a must-see when you visit Concord?
Oh, I mean, certainly the Old North Bridge, and I always tell people about the Old Manse, if they can get in there. I think Sleepy Hollow, certainly Author's Ridge, if someone's really interested in the authors. Orchard House, of course, so we've got so many points coming from the center that I think are must-sees. Yeah. Yeah, and also the burial ground in the center. I mean, I love the iconography, and I think that's fascinating, and that has its own history unto itself that I think is really cool. So the burial ground is also, I think, is important.
Do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you are kind of thinking about and want to share?
Well, in addition to tours, to go back to the Louisa May Alcott, my colleague Stephanie Cloutier and I have co-written a piece, an original living history piece, that features Louisa May Alcott and May Alcott, and we're really proud of it. And we've been performing that at libraries. We've been performing that at senior centers. We'd like to expand on that as well. But we're dressed in period costume, outfitted by the Concord Players, and it's really been a great experience, and people love it because they know a little bit about Little Women, or they know a little bit about the Alcotts, but this really not only touches on the well-known parts, but a lot of intimate facts that you probably wouldn't get otherwise, even from a tour, or maybe even going to the house. So we feel like this is an offering that is a little more of an intimate conversation piece. That's really what it is, but it's from primary sources, letters, and you're getting a different perspective also between these two sisters and their views and what things motivated them given their circumstances. So that's something else that I've enjoyed doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in again.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.